welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the lovely Kirsha Fox, who is the author of newly released Son of Deception, and homeschool mom of four, and avid gamer.
Hello. This is my co-host, Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything.
Yes, and today we are so excited to welcome Joseph Harkreader. Joe resides in Southern California with his husband, Alan, and dogs, Boo and Teo. He is a self-proclaimed otaku, aka anime fan and gamer with a severe coffee addiction. Joe is currently working on his anime-inspired fantasy series rooted within Arthurian legend, titled Knights of Avalon. Other writing projects are also in the works, along with a graphic design portfolio. So, welcome to the show, Joe. It's so good to have you.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. I love animated films. I am not like a huge anime watcher, just because I don't know. When I have the time, I'm just like doing like other stuff. But like I love Miyazaki films, and the one anime that I've watched all the way through is gonna be so cringe to you probably, but Inuyasha.
I love Inuyasha actually.
Oh yeah.
So many of us got to start with Inuyasha.
No, that's one of my favorites.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I always feel like a fraud in the anime community because I'm like, I've never really watched anything but Inuyasha, but like I love Inuyasha so much, so I'm like honorary member.
I had to laugh at myself because one of my main characters is a white-haired half demon, and when I realized it, I was like, "Oh, what did I do?"
Hey, nothing wrong with this.
Right. Yeah, no, I related to Inuyasha's struggle, being a halfie myself, so I was just like Inuyasha, yeah, and I just absolutely love that anime. It's so cute. But
so tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get started?
Well, I guess I just always loved telling stories since I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
And I remember once my mom, she gave me this like printout. It was on the blue paper, and it was a Star Trek fan fiction that I wrote. Complete disaster. I don't think it had any punctuation, but I was in elementary school. And I've just always loved storytelling. And then when my mom first got me my first internet, it was like a web TV. I don't know if anybody knows what that is anymore, but I went into Yahoo groups and I discovered these like RPGs, and I just fell in love with writing. It was really cool. So essentially you would just interact with other people through these emails, and you would create characters, whether they were original or they were canon, and you would just kind of tell a story and control your character and then tag people. And it was a good way to just kind of improv and just kind of, I don't know, just kind of like play off other people. It was really cool. From there, I got into writing fanfics of things that I like Charmed and Buffy and Smallville. And one day I decided I'm going to write a book.
Yeah.
So I guess that's how it started.
Love that. I feel like so many of us kind of find our way from like fan fiction or games where it involves a lot of imagination and creativity. One of my on my other podcast that I do, my co-host started out with literary role playing in a similar way, where she would just like after school jump on the computer and chat with her friends, and they would have these stories and characters written out and just like role play games like that. So that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way that teaches you how to like kind of think on your feet and just kind of be flexible with your creativity, because you never know how someone's going to react to your character. So you just have to be able to like ready for anything within the rules, obviously. But
absolutely, because you're getting that interaction with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So tell us a little bit about the genre you write. What do you mean when you say you're anime inspired in the story?
Well, speaking of anime, I just loved anime since I was a kid. My gateway anime was Ranma 1/2.
Okay.
And after that, Sailor Moon, and I'm still obsessed with Sailor Moon.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what I mean by anime inspired is there are certain, like, I guess, kind of tropish things or stylistic things that kind of define anime, I know authors, we're not supposed to read our reviews, but I do read my reviews. And something that I get from people is they're like, this is like an anime. It's like a video game, from the way characters sort of power up and discover their new abilities to the way that they fight, a little bit of the humor. So I guess that's what I mean by anime inspired, like just things that are stylistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all writing has tropes in it, right? So just you're following along with tropes that, it's interesting to me that like people can recognize that because like anime obviously is a visual medium and writing is not. So I love that you include enough that people are still like picking up on those stylistic choices.
It makes me
Um,
happy when I'm reading a book and I'm like, this person, like I got that reference. I know that
right.
gesture. You're like, oh, they're a fan too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like a secret handshake that you have with the
Mm-hmm.
audience with their fellow anime lovers.
One thing that I like that's kind of stylistic to anime is it feels like elemental powers are very tropish to anime,
Mm,
as well as just feeling like your characters aren't restricted by gravity. They can sort of just like jump around and fly around. So I mean, I guess I like doing that within the structure of like my battles, as far as just having them be kind of like grand and just epic battles. So I think that's maybe something
yeah.
that people connect with to anime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that that's one thing anime does great is like the different fight scenes and stuff that they do. What made you choose Arthurian lore in your writing?
I've always been a fan of it. I mean, I've seen different like TV shows. I mean, I can't say I've really read any books, but I love the show Merlin, and I've seen like other just
Mm,
mediums of entertainment where I thought it was really cool. And it was one of those things where I was kind of thinking, well, tropes are one thing. You have to embrace tropes because people pick up books based on tropes mostly. But
mhm,
I was like, well, I love mythology and I love storytelling as far as like just looking back on things that are recognizable. But what is something that hasn't been done 1,000 times? And
right.
there's nothing wrong with doing things that have been done 1,000 times, like Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology. Those are great. I love them. But I thought, well, I've seen some things with Arthurian like legends and mainstream, but I haven't seen it that as much as X, Y, or Z. So I guess that's what made
Mhm.
me choose to root it in Arthurian like legends. And
Yeah. It's always nice when you have like kind of a newer, like not as well traveled lore to play around with because you can really
yeah,
just bring
Mm-hmm.
your energy to that.
I have to say, I can't recall an Arthurian anime. Like that isn't usually a crosscut that you get there.
Hmm.
So
yeah, I don't think I've seen that either.
yeah,
Yeah, super exciting that you're creating this world then. Yeah.
yes. So that'll be a little bit of an original take, I'm sure. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process?
So I am a bit of, I guess, a planner. I'm an outliner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I first started writing, it was kind of funny because I mean, as we just start, we're kind of feeling our way through the dark. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start all of these files, and each chapter is going to have its own like Word doc, and I'm going to be like first draft, second draft. I was super meticulous. I'm not that
Right.
meticulous. I'm not that meticulous anymore, but I didn't know what I was doing, so I was kind of learning. And that's where I kind of got like kind of, I guess, my process as far as like planning out like the main beats of the story, kind of like creating my characters, because I had a little bit of practice doing that within like role playing. Because I mean, when you role play, you take an email or like a Word doc, and you're like name, appearance, personality, like different
Right.
stuff like that. So I took a little bit of that practice, and I created these characters, and I was like, okay, well, what are their motivations? So I got a little bit of the work done, and then my computer crashed and I lost everything. So I was like, oh my
Oh
Oh
no,
right.
no.
So then I
nightmare
restarted
fuel.
and I did all that and I started outlining the book. But yeah, I'm a planner. Currently though, I'm working on a project that I started for NaNoWriMo. I've never done it before. And I
Hmm.
think I'm doing a little bit of discovery writing. So that's new for me. But yeah, that's my process, is just to try and figure out characters and build a world and mythologies and stuff that I love around
Right.
characters.
I love that you talk about motivations when you talk about your discovering who your characters are.
Mhm.
And I feel like discovery writing is like awesome. We kind of refine our process as we write each new book and each new project. And so I feel like a lot of us, even when we're plotters, we do the discovery writing. And even when we're pantsers and we discovery write, we have like a to-do list or something that we have in the back of our head. So I feel like it's a spectrum of plotting and discovery writing. But you said earlier we like to ask like what are your strengths as a writer, and you said one of yours is just writing great characters. So what do you think makes for a great character?
Well, I think whether you're writing your antagonist or your protagonist, something that makes a great character for me is, let's go back to motivation. Let's go back
Mm-hmm.
to adding layers to this character and giving them a bit of depth and reason. I think as far as like when I write good guys, I don't want them to be perfect. And I think that was one
Right.
mistake I made when I was like super new, was I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna have these people walk into this chapter. They're gonna quip, they're gonna be funny, and they're gonna
Mm-hmm.
kick butt, and they're gonna be
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And then I like read everything back, and I was all like, what was even the point of this battle? They were never in danger.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
So yeah, for sure. I mean, as far as heroes go, give them flaws, like make them struggle, bloody their nose, make them fight for what they want versus like even what they need in the book. Um, I think that giving your antagonists reason instead of just kind of making them a mustache twirling villain makes them more
Right.
interesting too. So, one of the characters in my book, his name is Vincent, and he has a sister that he's fighting for, and he's been twisted and manipulated, but in his mind, he's doing the right thing and he's the hero. So, I
Right.
think in a lot of stories, if you can give reason and depth to your villains. I mean, granted, never excuse their methodology,
Right.
but it makes them a whole lot more interesting for sure. So I think that's what makes an interesting character, is to give them a bit of like genuine emotion and layered reasoning.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I hate characters that are kind of like evil for evil's sake, because that can be predictable in its own way, right? We always know they're always going to do this X, Y, and Z because they're the bad guy. But when we have like a motivation behind a character, then it really gives a lot, like you said, depth to the character, because we can all want to be famous, but we have different reasons why, whether it's money or you want to support your family or you just want to have power. Like that's going to change what each character does to become famous, and to what they're willing to do to be famous. um so it's really important to know your character's motivation,
Yes.
in my
Villain
opinion.
or hero, your
Yeah.
characters need to be relatable in some way. Otherwise, your readers just won't connect to them.
Yeah, I agree for sure. There's like one movie that comes to mind on the villain side where I was all like, I totally get it, but I don't agree with your
Mm,
methodology. Have you seen
right.
Hellboy through Golden Army?
Oh, I'm trying to remember if I've seen this. I've seen some of the Hellboy ones. So what was? Continue with your thought. And
Okay, so it's like
mm-hmm.
the second one that still had Ron Perlman in it because he had two movies.
Mm-hmm.
But the main bad guy was an elf, and essentially he was angry because he and the other races, including humanity, had an agreement or a pact, like a treaty of like things that they were bound to respect. And
Mm,
throughout, the ages, like those truths and those old ways were lost to humanity. And he was upset because he'd seen what we'd become and what we were doing to the earth. So that was his
right.
motivation of like revenge. And while I get like, totally, it's kind of a train wreck. I agree with him there, but I just didn't
Mm-hmm.
agree with his methodology. So on one hand, I was like, I totally get it. But on the other hand, I was like,
Right.
you're crazy.
Right, right. It's when the ends justify the means kind of mentality can get you in a lot of trouble,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
then, yeah, a lot of times you don't
Well,
want to become what you don't like about the other person.
Yeah.
the
So for
Brooklyn
me, I'm like,
Nine-Nine quote of "cool motive, still murder."
oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
So for me, when I storytell, I'm inspired by that. Where I'm like, okay, well, you're evil, but you're driven by X, Y, or Z. And in the end, ultimately, it's evil. But when you give it that depth, I feel like it gives the reader something to think about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's like I said, motivation is great to know about your character. Absolutely. Um, on the other side of it, what do you think makes for a weak character?
Well, I suppose all the opposite of what I just
Yes.
said.
Yeah,
True.
yeah.
No, I think what makes for like a weak character, especially if you're just talking about heroes, is somebody who doesn't have agency in their own story. So if you were to take a story and take your hero out of it and nothing changes, that's problematic for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess for me that would be like the number one thing. It's just like a character who doesn't have agency on their own story,
Right.
um, just lacks personality. Maybe someone who's too perfect. Because I
Oh,
mean, I don't
yeah.
think characters should be perfect. Like I said, for me, I was all like, my character's awesome. they're like these like badasses that are gonna walk in and just beat everybody up, and it was like, no, no, Joe, stop.
No, I
So yeah,
100% agree because like I think that's something that new authors do is like we have this like idea of our character so cool and they can kick butt and do this and that. But then like if they're so powerful or so good at what they do, like do we need to read 200 pages about them trying to do when we know like they're going to
right.
make it in the end? So
Yeah,
yeah.
just 200 pages of them only being cool. That's one thing I like about Sailor Moon is like in the
Mm,
beginning she was sort of this like cowardice crybaby and she was selfish, and throughout her art she becomes braver and more selfless,
right.
and I love that. She's willing to stand by her friends and people she
Mm,
cares about. So I love an arc where, yeah, I mean, maybe the character doesn't start off as the bravest person or the best fighter, but
right.
ultimately you kind of grow that character into somebody that maybe the reader admires or relates to or is inspired by, and I think that's really cool.
Absolutely.
All right.
I love that.
So, one thing that can be typically hard in anime and writing, especially, is how do you make a character stand out?
Hmm. I suppose maybe that goes to motivation, right?
Hmm.
I guess it just depends on the story. For me, my character, I mean, I guess I'll just kind of say my main character, his name is
Mhm.
Jasper Kane. And I was like, okay, well, how can I kind of make this guy cool, but how can I make it where there's room for growth? And I guess his motivation is he was cursed in the 1300s, so he's kind of an older guy.
Mhm.
And throughout his life, he's made very few connections. And I have like a side novella that I'm going to publish eventually. That's a prequel where it reveals like he did have these connections, and he lost these people. And part of his journey is kind of accepting the fact that he is flawed, but there is room for redemption in his story. And
Mhm.
just giving people like kind of like different character quirks. You know what I mean? Like I've heard people
Right.
say, hey, when you physically describe a character, don't just go for blonde hair, green eyes. You know what I mean? Go for
Mm.
like, do they have a scar on their face? Do they have any different, like, I guess, kind of different characteristics that make them stand out? And I feel like as far as a character's personality, you can't just go for like, are they nice? Or are they mean? Are they good? Or are they bad? Definitely, kind of zoom in on like kind of what makes them flawed or what makes them special. And I guess for me, for that character, something that kind of made him different than the rest of my cast was him coming back from this place of feeling hopeless to feeling inspired and like renewed hope within the story again. So I thought that
Right.
was kind of cool to like write that growth of that character, and hopefully that makes him stand out for people.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that knowing your characters like kind of ghosts, like what haunts them, is really helpful as well when you're making your character because like that's going to inform how they interact with other people in the story and the relationships they develop based off of their past trauma or background.
Yeah, definitely, I agree for sure.
Yeah. So speaking of writing characters, do you have any tips or kind of like hacks for like minor or secondary characters that maybe like you don't want to spend as much time on like thinking and planning how that character is, but you still want them to be really strong and developed?
I guess I just have a thought with like writing in general, and maybe this isn't a popular opinion, but I think it's a helpful one. Is like, I guess for me, when I think of like storytelling, it should serve two purposes. Like whether it's a character, whether it's a plot twist, one, you have to ask yourself, do these characters or does this part of the plot advance well the plot, and
Mm-hmm.
does it help character growth? So when I think of like secondary characters, I mean, I don't want mine to be generic,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I mean, I'm not going to give them a whole backstory, but I try and ask myself, like, well, if they're in this part of the book, what do they contribute, and how can I make them, like, I guess, enjoyable? So I don't want to give
Mm-hmm.
anyone like a generic personality, but it all goes into like, how do they interact with this character? How are they guiding them? What information are they giving them? So as long
Right.
as you give any character quality or some sort of reason within the story, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be something that's like super deep. It's just within that moment, ask yourself, well, what does this add to the story? And is it enjoyable? And I guess that's kind of what I try and aim for, whether it's a main character or a secondary character.
Hmm.
Yeah, love that.
All right. Do you have a favorite part of writing?
Hmm. I love going into research mode. That's my that's my
Oh,
favorite
okay.
part. I love like researching like different mythologies and different gods and like monsters and demons and spirits. I guess that's like my favorite part of like, I guess like kind of like the pre-writing phase. But
Hmm.
this is probably kind of weird for some people, but I enjoy editing. Like I love editing because it's like you already have like your ideas down. It's this like
Hmm.
lumpy mold of like this lumpy like ball of clay, and you
Hmm.
get to sort of like fine tune it and craft it into something that you're super proud of. So that's my favorite part, I guess, outside from like the geeky mythology part. I love
Right.
editing. That's my favorite.
No, I am super excited to hear you say that, because usually it's like the opposite, where people are like, I hate editing. So I love your perspective of getting to fine tune and kind of polish the gem, or find what you're
Mhm.
making out of that ball of clay.
Yeah.
Um, you have therefore, so research and kind of I think that that's a great way of like sparking your ideas, is by doing research. So research I also find really fun. But do you have a least favorite part of writing?
Okay, so as much as I love research, something that is like always the slowest part of writing for me is the first draft, because
Right.
it's like for me, like starting every chapter is like the icebreaker of an awkward conversation. How do I do this? Have I done this like in other chapters, as far as like, starting off with like my character's doing this, my character's name, or, X, Y, and Z. So for me,
Hmm.
the awkward, the most awkward part is like the first draft. And I know maybe that's like super weird for some people, but for me, that's like, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of where you're telling yourself a story and figuring things out, so it doesn't
Yeah.
flow quite as well. Yeah, when it's coming out sometimes.
Something I recently made myself do is turn off my Grammarly add-on, because I was so like
Oh,
obsessed with like
right.
staring at it, and then that made me take even longer, because I'd sit and try and like edit things as I went. I'm like, okay, no,
Mhm.
just
Right.
right. You can edit later.
Right. Yeah, I generally don't like absolutisms in writing advice, because everyone is so different, that like you can't really approach writing from one way. But that is one thing I will share. Advice I will share is that I don't I don't edit while I'm writing, because like I feel like it's a completely different frame of mind. Like when you're creating and you're being
Mhm.
inspired, versus like editing, you're going to be more analytical, you're going to be more critical of things. And so like to me that kind of stunts creativity. So I like to wear separate hats when I'm like doing the writing, because like if I get too much in editor mode, then I'm just like not free to be as creative, because I'm like nitpicking over like, is this the perfect word, or does the sentence like shine as much as it can, when it's just like, no, I'm just trying to figure out the story. Yeah. So
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I'll sit and try and like
Completely
rewrite the
agree.
same paragraph 5 times.
Having the
that is
computer
something.
correct you constantly is a little bit like someone reading over your shoulder. You're like, "Come on, I'm
Right.
still writing it."
Right. So,
Right. Right.
random thought for anyone who is frustrated with editing. I totally get it's frustrating, but I feel
Mhm.
like if you work with like critique partners, if you have
Mhm.
beta readers, and if you do work with like a professional editor, use that as a learning tool. Don't use it as somebody doing the work for you, but look at how they
Mhm.
analyze and your work, and like the feedback they give you. For me, that like taught me a lot about some of my bad habits, some of the
Right.
terminology and the phrases I used a lot. So I guess for me, it made editing more enjoyable, because I wasn't as stressed out about X, Y, Z. Not to say my writing's perfect now, but if you have an idea of things you need to work on, it makes it a lot less stressful, for sure.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah, it's very good to know kind of your strengths and weaknesses as a writer, because then like I'm gonna nail X, Y, and Z, but like I'm not the best at having body language or other things with the dialogue, so they're not just talking in a void. Like if you know that, then like when you're editing what to look for, and just be like, okay, here's a wall of dialogue. Let's add some stuff in and
Yeah.
fill it out. So yeah, I love that advice.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of writing advice, do you have writing advice that you felt was like really helpful for you?
As far as just, writing advice, I would say read as much as possible. Maybe that's not the most popular opinion. For me, I recently did a poll on my social media where I asked people, do you read within the genres you write? Some people do, some people don't.
Hmm.
And you're right, every bit of advice is definitely like individual, like whether you plot, whether you don't plot,
Hmm.
whatever. I guess for me, I just try and consume media. I try to understand craft as far as like show versus tell. I try when I watch things or read things, I try and study character arcs, plot structure, So just understand craft for sure. I think that's incredibly helpful to telling like a cohesive story. Definitely be open to finding community. I think that's really important
Mm.
to find people who support you, to have extra sets of eyes on your work. Cause like sometimes we are so close to our work that we don't really see where we need work. So I guess that's important as well.
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, I know. You can't really like work in a vacuum because if you are making the same mistakes over and over, it's just reinforcing bad habits. So yeah, getting that
Yeah.
interaction from other writers and readers is important.
Hmm. Writing is surprisingly a social activity as
Mm-hmm.
far as sharing and getting feedback and helping others and doing swaps. And um, I've really enjoyed all the new author friends I've made since joining the community. But I think it's really important for any new author to find their community, find someone, find themselves a group that will help them on their way for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree. And I get like writing is something really, really personal, and a lot of people are nervous to share their work. But if you're gonna publish, you might wanna, find people you trust and people who aren't gonna like completely shred you to ribbons, and
Mhm.
Right.
and grow within that community versus just kind of being in a vacuum, as you said, and then just hitting the
Mm-hmm.
publish button and then getting all that in your reviews.
Mhm. You do need
Yeah.
people who are going to be honest with you and say, you know what, you need to make this better, or like this chapter isn't doing anything
Yeah.
for your story.
Mm-hmm.
You need people who are going to be
Right.
honest, but at the same time, yes, you have to. If they're going to
I
shred you, that's not
right.
helpful either.
No, no, no.
Right. I feel like as authors, we should have thick skins when it comes to our writing because we should have that separation of this is my writing, I'm proud of it, I love it, but it's not me and my value and worth.
Oh yeah.
But it's something that you have to learn to do as a writer, right? Like we have to learn how to take criticism and critique and that feedback without immediately getting defensive or like upset about it. And I feel like that's a skill that like you have to practice, right? Like patience. Like you don't just wake up one day and you're like, I have all the patience in the world. Like it's the
Yeah.
same with a thick skin where I feel like you really have it's something you practice, like getting feedback, taking it on, giving yourself space to be like, okay, how do I feel about this? And then reacting because yeah, like critique and criticism is like a wonderful thing for us to use, but it can hurt sometimes
Oh
because
yeah.
that's
No.
our baby. Our books are our babies, so yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first guy. Like I can't even remember his name, but it was this author that I connected with online, and he
Mm.
had a book out, or he was releasing a book, and I was like, oh, you like I want to read some of your stuff. Will you read some of my stuff, and give me some feedback? And of course, I got the feedback, and I was upset, and I was like, he's a man, he's a man. You know what I mean? Um,
Right.
but ultimately, I joined a writing group and I made some friends and I got feedback and I was like, okay, well, like that's cool.
Mm.
I'll consider things, and it really helped me grow as a writer for sure. And as a result, my characters do not smirk, shrug, or sigh half as much. So
Right. All I know, my characters are always nodding and smiling, and I'm like,
yeah,
people do other things. Like,
yeah,
but I always write those
yeah.
two actions with my
So, do you have any issues with writer's block? And if you do, how do you deal with it?
I don't think I have like any major issues with writer's block. I mean, there are times maybe like when the words don't flow as much as other days. I think a lot of writers are under the misconception that you have to sit and like write every single day, and maybe some people can, and that's cool. But I feel like especially if you're indie, you sort of have to like wear it's many hats. Whether it's
Mhm.
a writer, if you can't afford particular things, like for me, I commission art, and I put my stuff together myself, but as far as writer's block goes, I guess, just give yourself space from a project, listen to music. Just go for a walk, watch a TV show, like kind of immerse yourself in things that inspire or relax you and don't focus so much on like, I can't do it.
Right.
Um, so I think that's important. Just give yourself space from a project to just allow yourself to be like, okay, well, I need to take a beat, and that's okay.
All right,
Absolutely.
go fill your cup.
Yeah.
Right. Can't pour from an empty cup for sure. Um, so you've been kind of writing for a long time as far as like since you were little telling stories, but what has been your greatest or your biggest writing victory so far?
Maybe this sounds kind of silly, but something that made me really, really happy was like my initial publishing disaster was through a vanity press, and that
Oh,
I didn't even know what that was at the time. But so, like most people, I kind of went through the motions where I was all like, I'm gonna, get my book traditionally published, and
mhm.
and I
Right.
and I queried, and I got rejection letters, and I was like, okay, well, never mind, I don't want to do this because rejection sucks, but it's part of
Mhm.
life. Um, so I was like, okay, I'll self-publish, and I was like, price tag shock.
Right.
Because to do things professionally, it's expensive for self-publishing for sure. But I did manage to get my book published before my mom passed, so that was like really really cool. And she was like
Right.
one of the biggest inspirations that I had to get into writing, because even when I discovered these Yahoo groups and these RPGs, like we did them together, and that was like something really special. And like I love that so much. So for me, even though here, 1 second, this I still have the book. Um,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so even though it wasn't like my best work ever, and it wasn't like this like great experience working with this like vanity publisher, like
Mhm.
just accomplishing that before my mom passed, like was like something that was really cool. And I remember for a few days, she was in hospice care, and I just kind of sat and like I read the book out loud,
Mhm.
and we just had a laugh, and we had so much fun. So that was something that was really special. So I don't know if that constitutes an accomplishment, but definitely getting this
Oh,
out
absolutely.
and being able to share it with
Yeah.
like my best friend was like something that was really special.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing that with us.
yeah.
Thank you.
I love that you had that special memory and experience with her where you were able to share your book. I know when my mom held my first published book too and was like, wow, you wrote this, like that was such a meaningful experience for me too. I lost my mom last year. So I can relate to that pride and that like great experience you have where you're just like, they got to see my dream come true before we lost them. So thank you
Yeah,
for
I'm
sharing
sorry
that
about your
with
loss.
us. Oh, same to you. But yeah, I love that you guys were able to like share that experience together.
Yeah. It was kind of funny, speaking of writing habits that are bad, but I was
Yeah.
reading out loud, and I'd never done that before. And it's always an interesting experience when you either hear what you write out loud or you read it out loud. And I use the word suddenly a lot.
Ah,
So it became this like inside joke where I would be reading and I would get to a part where I would say suddenly, but I would just like censor it, and she'd be like suddenly. And
yes, she could
it was
catch
like super, it was
the
super funny.
pause.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that sense of
So
humor
yeah.
too.
So
Yeah.
speaking of writing tips, listen to your work out loud. Read your dialogue out loud,
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
and make sure it sounds
Yeah.
natural.
Right. Yeah, no, reading aloud is a great way to edit in general just because you
Yeah.
catch stuff because like when you're looking at your work, you've read it like a million times and so your brain kind of fills in the missing pieces and then when you
Oh
read
yeah.
it out loud, you're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this
It
word is
forces you to
completely
slow
missing."
down.
Yeah.
Right.
That's funny.
Slow down, hear the beat of it, hear that the words, how they mesh well with each other.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hear how your audiobook is going to sound someday.
Right.
Yeah, I'm actually working on that right now. I'm on ACX looking for voice actors.
Oh,
So
Oh,
that's been
okay.
nice.
exciting.
That is super exciting. Congratulations on that. And
Mhm.
congratulations on publishing your first book. I know it wasn't the best experience for you because it was with, you were dealing with a vanity press, but it's such an accomplishment in general to write a full story, let alone
Mhm.
edit and go through the whole process. So
Oh yeah.
definitely an accomplishment and a victory you should be very proud of.
That book was a
Uh,
very respectable size.
it
Oh
was,
well,
yeah.
it did evolve into
Mhm.
Yeah.
the books that I have out now, which
Oh, yeah.
this is the anime version of Curse of the Shadow King. So I
Hmm.
went back and I just did like major re-edits, because I didn't really at the time really understand show versus tell, and maybe some of
Right.
the dialogue wasn't so great.
Mhm.
And I added like new parts to the character arcs and the plot, and I
Mhm.
just
Right.
made a much better story. And this is what evolved into Curse of the Shadow King. So this is the sort of realistic cover,
Yeah,
and then
Hmm.
I've got the anime edition, and then I have two other
Yeah.
books as
they're
well.
both beautiful.
Yeah, I love that.
If you
Yeah,
don't mind me showing
congratulations.
off the sequel.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna focus on you.
Rebirth of the Phoenix King is the sequel, and then I came up with like a side story, which is going to tie into the series. That's called Yoruba Night.
Mhm.
Oh, I love the
Yeah, so I've
cover.
got three out
Yeah,
right now. So
wonderful.
So thankfully, the vanity publisher isn't where it stopped.
Right. And that can be such a frustrating experience and really discourage people from continuing in the industry. So I'm so glad that you were just like lesson learned and able to develop the books and go indie and do it all. Because yeah, that can be super discouraging when you have like a negative experience in the beginning of your journey.
Oh yeah.
It's an important message to learn that like you're going to fail, you're going to mess up, you're going to make mistakes, but you can recover and keep going.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. I think along my journey, you know, there are good days and there are bad days, and for me, I just tried to take every kind of misstep as a lesson
Mm,
and something that I could learn and grow from. Because oftentimes in life, you know, the things we learn from are our mistakes and just kind of stumbling a bit. But you know, you've gotta pick yourself up and apply what you learn and celebrate every win. Because
right.
yeah, it's a tough path, this career, but celebrate every win and surround yourself with good community who are going to cheer you on.
I love that. Yeah, I always, whenever I finish a draft or hit a milestone, I always like, let's go out to dinner and celebrate, or let's
Oh
make a
yeah,
cake or
I love that.
something. Yeah, because I'm all about the positive reinforcement.
I love it.
Right. Do you have a favorite book or a favorite author?
You know, I think one of the authors that I really liked before I started really diving into writing full novel is Cassandra Clare. And I know she's not the most popular person, but I just love Shadowhunters. So that's like one of my
Mhm.
favorites. Um, Maybe this is sort of random, but I love this author. Her name, or her pen name, is S.D. Perry, and she wrote a series of like Resident Evil novels that are just amazing. I love them so much.
Okay.
Like
Mhm.
I've read all of them multiple times. So yeah, if you're a video game fan and you like Resident Evil, S.D. Perry, check it out.
Yeah, always like for me, if you can reread a book and still get as much joy from it, then obviously it's a winner for sure.
Yeah. Oh,
I
Rick
got
Riordan was
excited when
cool
you
too.
said Cassandra Clare because like literally her latest book just arrived at my door today. And I
Ah,
put it aside as a reward to read when I finish my editing
Yeah.
for this
yeah,
current project. So yeah,
yeah.
I
Kira has
absolutely
been
love her book so much.
slogging through edits, trying to get it done to get the second book out. So that's exciting.
Yes.
But yeah, she's. I've been feeling for her because she's just like another day of editing.
Yeah, like I love Cassandra Clare's books. This Christmas I got like a box set that has all of the Mortal Instruments books, and then I got the Infernal
Oh,
Devices,
Hmm.
nice.
and then it was kind of cool because then I went on to Amazon and I saw like Chain of Gold and Chain of Iron were on sale too, so I grabbed those and I was just
Hmm.
I'm doing it.
Full set.
We got
Yeah, getting
Queen
all
of
the books.
Thorns is the latest, I think. So
Yeah. Um, is there so what because of your favorite books, like what do you love about them? Like what makes them so special to you?
Well, I guess the things that I like about her universe is I like the mythology. I like the idea of shadow hunters. I'm always like a fan of like things like witchcraft. You know, just tough warriors. I mean, I like Buffy the
hmm
Vampire Slayer, so just the
Hmm.
idea of humans that have supernatural abilities, I think, is cool.
hmm
Like werewolves, just all that type of mythology stuff. I really like it. But I also think that she writes really excellent character arcs. Like I love Jace, I love Clary. I think
Mm.
that she's really good at writing dialogue, action, humor, romance. So like all of those elements, I just think she does them superbly.
Oh, love it. All right. What writing advice? I love to ask this question. What writing advice do you hate?
Okay, so maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but if anyone is going through like social media influencers, something that I don't like are people who tell you not to do X, Y, and Z because it's cliche.
Oh,
I don't like that because it's like, okay, so what if you have your character wake up from a dream? So what if someone's getting ready in the morning, or just all of these like ridiculous things that
right. Like
obviously
describing yourself in a mirror.
yeah, I mean
Yeah.
obviously if you make it so generic, or yeah, let's take the mirror trope for instance. So for me in my book, I have like the character wake up and he's like, oh, he looked at his tired reflection in the mirror, but that was pretty much it. It wasn't me like he looked in the mirror and then I like info dumped everything about the way that the character looked. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. I just feel like everyone has an opinion and a way of doing things, and I think some advice isn't quite helpful when it's so blanket state. When it's like a blanket statement. You know what I mean?
Right, absolutely. That kind of nothing applies to everyone on everything, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, those widespread blanket statements.
Learn the rules and then break them.
Yes,
Right,
exactly.
absolutely. Yeah, that's the perfect way
Yeah,
of
no,
putting it.
for a while I was watching videos and I got so like pounded in my head, show don't tell, that there was this part of me that was like I was afraid of exposition. You know what I mean? So it's like
Right,
you can't take this advice to such an extreme that you never do learn the rules and learn how to break them, and you're
right.
just sort of like in this box. And I think it's like stunting to creativity, honestly, when you are just listening to all these outside voices telling you how to tell your story.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, don't drive, put the car in park and all that. You don't need to show all that, right? There's always instances where you'd want to tell. So show don't tell is like a great rule overall, but yeah, there are instances where you don't want to like
Yes.
obsess over it. For
Tell
sure.
what they need to know,
Right,
like
right.
leave out all the junk they don't need to know.
Right.
Yeah,
Cut the
yeah.
fluff, cut the fluff.
Absolutely. Or like when people, everyone knows Chekhov's gun, like if you introduce a gun, it's got to go off. But people don't realize like the reverse of that is like, don't describe objects that are not important to the plot or the story or the character. Because
Yeah.
if you do, then people are like, wait, why did I need to hear, 2 pages about, this location, and it doesn't ever show up again in the book later on. So
I
yeah.
agree. Yeah, but I think that's where some people like kind of they get so into world building that they feel that the reader has to know everything that they've world built. Where if it helps you to understand it and to tell the better story,
Right.
that's cool. But for sure, I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to push the story forward or grow the character, like you said earlier. Yeah. I do want to jump back before we end the show to what you were saying about like describing characters. And I really like that you said like to describe like a quirk or characteristic where they maybe show some personality, right? It does some personality work as well. Can you elaborate on that a little bit though? Like what do you think is important to include or not include for characters when you're building them?
Like as far as like visually or like their personality.
Both. Like what do you think, like what are some maybe common missteps people make, or what are things that you've like, this so and so did it right, or
Oh, okay. Well, I guess like one thing that comes to mind as far as like physically describing characters, because this is like one thing that I used to do a lot, is I used to info dump like what people look like. So I was all like, she was 5'6" and she was like this and blah 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 blah, and I would just go over like I was like filling out like a physician's chart. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like you can describe things without being like that analytical, because it's kind of boring for people to read. But as far as like characteristics, like I have a character who has like 2 different color eyes. So like I kind of pointed that out versus saying, hey, he's 5'7". I was like, well, he has these like wild like crimson curls. He has a dimple. He has 2 different color eyes. I have another character where she has like purple and black hair. You know what I mean? Kind of point out things that aren't so like mundane, I guess. I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at versus like. So yeah, I mean, if you can make your characters stand out in different ways, whether it's like a scar, that like having a character that has a scar that goes across the bridge of his nose. So I mean, just point out like things like that where it identifies the character versus, like I said, just things where if you were like, oh well, this person is like 5'10" and they have brown hair and blue eyes. That's like so do like 50,000 other people. So if you compare like those things with, or like kind of combine them with like things that are special to that character or unique to that character, then I think that like makes them stand out more in people's mind. When you think of anime, for instance, that's why characters that, despite the fact they're Japanese, have like pink hair, blue hair. That's why they look so different, is because if you just had a bunch of characters walking around that all had black hair, essentially, and I'm not saying all Japanese people do, but that's why they just all look so different, is because it's supposed to give them their own kind of personality, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, like I said, I love the idea of including a physical characteristic or appearance point that tells you something about their personality. So maybe they have a beauty mark, but they covered up it with a lot of makeup because they're self-conscious or worried too much about what other people think,
Yeah.
But those little clues that like tell us about the character without being like Aquiline knows,
Mhm.
like, let me describe every feature on their face, and like you
Oh
said,
yeah.
that kind of like list of descriptors.
Do they take care of their appearance or not?
Right. Hmm.
Do they dye their hair and why?
Right.
Yes.
Oh
Right.
yeah, that makes sense for sure.
Yeah, all that stuff tells us more about the character. Yeah, so love that. We do want to give you an opportunity to tell us like where we can find you online. You can talk about your books a little more and where we can get those.
Okay, well, you can find me online. I have an official website. It's authorjosephharkreader.com. And a lot of my social media just sort of like matches that. Like my Instagram is like author_Joseph_Harkreader.
Hmm.
Same with my TikTok is author Joseph Harkreader. I think my Twitter is at Joey Harkreader, but so yeah, you can find me. I'm usually pretty active on social media, more so on TikTok because TikTok is super fun.
Hmm.
And about my books, as far as you want to know, like kind of the genre, or just kind of what would you like to know about?
Yeah, so tell us. So you have 3 books out. You said.
Oh yeah, Curse of
Yeah.
the Shadow King, like I said, is book one, and you can find it on KU Kindle paperback, hardback, and there's 2 editions. Rebirth of the Phoenix King, same thing, except right now it isn't KU, but I'm designing an anime cover for it.
Oh.
And then Yoruba Night is on KU and Kindle and paperback and hardback. Like I said, I love going into research mode and just diving into different mythology. So one thing that I really love about those books is that I thought, well, what's kind of something that's special for Arthurian mythology? And I thought Avalon,
Mhm.
right? So I have all of these pantheons of gods and these people that just have different belief systems within the book, the stories. So you'll find like Norse mythology, Egyptian mythology, Africans, like there's like this, like it's a party.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that sounds
And
super interesting.
so yeah, I mean, it's anime inspired. It has a lot of mythology. It's action packed. There are positive LGBTQ representations and heroes, magical girls, shifters, lots of
Mm.
imaginative mythology. So I love that within my writing, and I hope that people enjoy reading it.
Oh, it sounds absolutely fantastic. So, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your stories
Mhm.
with it. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you about this, and you've had some really great advice on characters.
Thank you.
And we really enjoyed having you. And also, thanks to everyone listening along. Remember to join us next time when we welcome our next guest. And remember, there's always more than one way up a mountain. If you are interested in being on the show, you can look us up on social media at The Telmont Show or email us at thetelmontshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much. And
Thank
it
you
Thank
was
so
you.
much.
really great talking with you.
It's been
Mhm.
awesome. I've had a blast. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.